The NFL is the most profitable sports league in the world, with each of its 32 teams making over $500 million in revenue each year. Such a profitable league should sport the greatest and most cutting edge operations on Earth, but some blemishes remain. The oldest franchise in the league, the Cardinals, can trace their roots all the way back to the 1800s, yet have never won a Super Bowl. In fact, they've only been to the big game one time, and at one point went 50 years without a playoff win. How can such an incompetent franchise even exist? How can a team that's 100 years old have less relevant history than teams formed in the 90s? Well, those 90s expansion teams did not have to deal with the stranglehold of nepotism. In 1932, the Chicago Cardinals were purchased by businessman Charles Bidwell. By most accounts, Charles seemed like he was a good owner, but his untimely death in 1947 left the team in the hands of his widow, Violet Bidwell. The team she inherited won the NFL championship and returned to the title game the next year. Violet was the first female owner in NFL history and oversaw a move of the franchise to St. Louis. Violet would pass away only 2 years after the move, and the team was now stuck with Bill Bidwell. Bill Bidwell was a notoriously cheap man, and you can see the footprint of his philosophy all over the history of the team. By the time he had full control of the team in the 70s, the roster was a revolving door of young guns and over-the-hill veterans. Quarterback Jim Hart led the team through this era, and while they made the playoffs in back-to-back years on the backs of their defense, they were never able to advance. The team had a solid foundation in the mid-70s, but lacked the firepower necessary to compete with the Cowboys consistently. Because there was no will to upgrade the roster, the team fell back into obscurity after the 75 season. The team's only other playoff appearance in St. Louis was thanks to a strike-shortened 1982 season where they were easily handled by the Green Bay Packers. By 1987, the team had worn out its good graces with the city of St. Louis. Not only was the team bland, uninspiring, and unsuccessful, they also shared a name and stadium with a more successful franchise, MLB's St. Louis Cardinals. The baseball Cardinals had won 3 World Series in the time the football Cardinals had been in town. The baseball Cardinals won a World Series on their home turf, whereas the football Cardinals never even got to host a playoff game in nearly 30 years. With such little success, there was very little public will to fund a new stadium for the football Cardinals, which Bidwell had been pushing for throughout his time owning the team. Constant threats of moving finally came to fruition in 1988, when the Cardinals moved to Tempe, Arizona. Bidwell only chose Arizona because Arizona State agreed to let them use their stadium, whereas other choices such as Jacksonville or Baltimore would have required a new stadium to be built. Playing in the city of Tempe, the team naturally was called the Phoenix Cardinals. The state flag of Arizona was added to the uniforms just to remind us that they, in fact, do play in Arizona. The Phoenix Cardinals of Tempe of Arizona were terrible from the get-go, especially on defense. The team was ran in the exact same manner they were in St. Louis, only now the players had to deal with playing in the desert heat. The Cardinals would begin their run in Tempe with 6 losing seasons, and no players of note. The Phoenix area was the fastest growing area in the US at the time, and has a well-deserved reputation as a transplant city. People moving from the East Coast or Midwest already had allegiances to other, more successful franchises, and saw no reason to root for the awful forgotten franchise at Sun Devil Stadium. At least by 1994 they got around to fixing the team name, now becoming the Arizona Cardinals. They even managed to hit 500 after the name change. Throughout the 90s, it was clear that nobody was happy with the state of the franchise. Fans and players alike could not deal with the open-air environment at Sun Devil Stadium, and attendance reflected as much. Local college legend Jake Plummer would join the team in 1997, which ushered in the first distinct era of Arizona football nearly a decade after they moved. Plummer would lead the team into a playoff win in 1998, which was the first playoff win for the franchise since 1947. To put that into perspective, that is the entire duration of the Cold War, plus another 7 years between Cardinal playoff victories. The Dallas Cowboys, the team they defeated in this momentous playoff game, came into existence 13 years into said playoff drought, and won 5 Super Bowls before the Cardinals won a single playoff game. 2 different cities, 3 different names, and this is all that Bidwell had to show for it. Naturally, the Cardinals got flattened in the next round by Randall Cunningham's Vikings. After the '98 season, Jake Plummer regressed hard and the team fell back into the basement of the NFC East. Injuries also decimated the team in 1999, as well as an extremely tough schedule. Fans could forgive these factors outside of the team's control, but attendance was at an all-time low and the losses continued to mount thereafter. The Cardinals were a sideshow, and the stadium atmosphere compared to that of the Sun Devils just further compounded this fact. Sun Devil Stadium was one of the most intimidating environments for opponents in the 90s, but on Sundays it was either full of opposing fans or no fans at all. Even though the Cardinals, and especially Bidwell, had given nothing to the people of Phoenix, in 2000 a vote was passed to finally build a new stadium. Naturally, 75% of the stadium costs would be covered by taxpayers, since Bidwell didn't have any tangible wealth that wasn't tied to just owning the franchise. University of Phoenix Stadium would finally open in 2006, and it was a genuine marvel for the time. The stadium became the new home to the Fiesta Bowl and has hosted numerous Super Bowls since its opening. Around the same time, Bill Bidwell ceded control of day-to-day operations to his son Michael. Michael had been instrumental in getting the new stadium built, and he showed a bit more willingness to spend on the roster. Larry Fitzgerald was already the new face of the franchise by the time the new stadium opened, but was plagued with poor QB play throughout his young career. Former USC standout Matt Leinart proved completely ineffective at the pro level, which gave a second chance to former MVP Kurt Warner. Although it previously looked like Warner was on his way to retirement, his career was reinvigorated with a new opportunity. In 2008, the Cardinals made the playoffs with a 9-7 record once again, only this time they sported one of the best offenses in the entire league. Fitzgerald went from just a Pro Bowler to a first-team All-Pro receiver and one of the highest-regarded players in the league. Warner and Fitzgerald made the most of their opportunity, dragging a porous defense all the way to Super Bowl 43. If not for the most heartbreaking play in Cardinals history, they could have been the most unlikely Super Bowl champions in modern history. 2009 was a similar story until the Cardinals had to face the bounty-hunting Saints in this divisional round. Warner would be knocked out of the game after a series of hard hits, and he would call it a career in the following offseason. Even though the Cardinals fell short of the ultimate prize during the Warner era, the team finally had a legitimate culture and was no longer the punchline of the league. In just 5 short years, the team went from a sideshow that nobody cared about to winning the NFC Championship in their new home stadium. This would be a huge accomplishment for any team, let alone the most pathetic franchise in pro sports to that point. While the team returned to the basement after Warner's retirement, there was a certain weight off the franchise's shoulders after having made a Super Bowl run. At the end of the day, however, Michael is still a Bidwell at heart. Even if he is undoubtedly a better owner than his father, that is an extremely low bar to clear. The chief complaint is his blinding loyalty to his hires, even when they have shown that they deserve to be shown the door. Ken Whisenhunt was able to ride the 2008 Super Bowl run all the way until 2012, despite being completely exposed without Kurt Warner under center. GM Steve Keim inexplicably stayed employed for 9 years, even after an extreme DUI in 2018. The Carson Palmer era that Keim had orchestrated came to an end before the DUI, yet he managed to stay employed with the team for another 5 years. Former Cardinals such as Tyrann Mathieu were vocal in their disdain for the front office, and their propensity to cheap out and disrespect star players. This is all not even to mention the embarrassingly primitive facilities, Michael's vocal support of Brett Kavanaugh, and high ticket prices no matter how terrible the team is. Michael Bidwell is still one of the worst owners in the NFL, and may take the mantle once Dan Snyder is finally out of the picture in Washington. The penny-pinching operations run in the family, and frankly the NFL is too big and profitable for one of their teams to be run like it's a small business. The Bidwells have owned and ruined this organization for over 90 years, and at the end of the day, the ones most affected by their operations are the fans in Arizona. The team is once again at rock bottom after another round of failures, and unfortunately at this moment there's just not much reason for optimism. Even with a new GM and coach, it's still the same family at the heart of it all. Monty Ossenford seems to be a step in the right direction, but if he ends up failing as well, Bidwell will keep him around for at least 3 years too long. After all, that's what happened with Keim, Cliff, and Whisenhunt. You can't teach an old dog new tricks, you simply have to have the dog sell the team to someone who cares.